I call the meeting to order. Excellencies, distinguished working group members, distinguished delegates and participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I preside over the closing panel of the second annual United Nations Forum on Business and Human Rights, Priorities and Key Issues for 2014. These past 3 days have been full and we hope fruitful participation in providing a unique venue for rich and dynamic multi-stakeholder exchanges. The working group will provide their final reflection to end the forum, but before that, we have a most distinguished panel to present key issues, opportunities, and priorities in the year to come to help ensure the wide and effective dissemination and implementation of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The unprecedented representation of states, businesses, civil society, indigenous peoples, international organizations, and other stakeholders in this forum demonstrates overwhelming interest and support for making the implementation of the guiding principle a reality. As we go forward, even greater representation is expected from all stakeholders and all sectors. After all, while our role and profession differ, we have come here in many ways united to advance the global business and human rights agenda. There has been sharing of both good practices and identification of challenges, and it is clear our effort must be both collective and inclusive. No attempt to summarize the discussion can do justice to the richness of the wide range of perspective and experiences presented over the last 3 days. In a very broad stroke, it is nevertheless evident that there is significant movement around the guiding principles and uptake by all relevant stakeholder groups. As has been repeatedly highlighted, the journey toward wide and effective implementation has only begun though, and challenges and a number of issues in need of clarification remain, not least on the ground. Many efforts are needed to ensure that we build our own capacity. We are all responsible for this cause. It will therefore be important to hear the views of stakeholders on key issues and priority for going forward. If time permits, we shall open up the floor for intervention from participants. I would like now to introduce our distinguished panel. The first is Madam Mary Robinson from Mary Robinson Foundation Climate Justice. She is former High Commissioner of Human Rights. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you very much indeed. Is this on? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Chairperson and working group members, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be back here in Geneva and an honour to participate in this, the second annual UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. And I must say, Chairperson, I'm really very pleased at the gender balance on this panel, given the subject matter of business and human rights. Things are really moving on. The fact that so many of you have gathered over here over the last 3 days to discuss successes and shortcomings in the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights is an encouraging sign of growing global commitment to this critical agenda. The consensus which was achieved by the Human Rights Council in 2011 through the unanimous endorsement of the UN Guiding Principles and their widespread and rapid uptake by diverse stakeholder groups has been pivotal in moving the business and human rights agenda from the margins of international policy debates. I recall well from my 5 years here as High Commissioner and later as chair of the Business Leaders Initiative on Human Rights, and then as founding chair and now patron of the Institute for Human Rights and Business, how deeply divided all stakeholders were just a decade ago. None of us should underestimate how difficult the challenge was of moving this agenda toward higher ground. We should continue to acknowledge the importance of the guiding principles in establishing the foundations needed to ensure that all states carry out their duty to protect, that all businesses, implement their independent responsibility to respect all rights, and that those negatively impacted have access to effective remedies. But we must also recognise that human rights abuses linked to business activity remain all too common. I must say I welcomed the Working Group's 2013 annual report to the General Assembly, which focused on the issue of Indigenous people's rights and highlighted that the guiding principles have to be interpreted in a manner consistent with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and ILO Convention 169. The work of building national, regional and international systems to ensure effective implementation has only just begun. My own efforts over recent years to address the links between climate change and human rights face a similar challenge. We've made the case for climate justice, and people are increasingly responding, but commitment to concrete action is far too slow. In the context of the private sector, there's still an urgent need to demonstrate that acting on climate change is not a constraint, but an opportunity and makes good business sense. The same is true for making faster progress on the broad human rights agenda as well. So what does this mean for the year ahead? My message to all of you is that 2014 must be a time in which all of us take more strategic and effective action on the interlinking agendas of human rights, climate change and development. It's important to recall that 2014 is critical to the successful delivery in 2015 of a new universal and legally binding climate agreement and a new development agenda building on the Millennium Development Goals and incorporating the Sustainable Development mandated at Rio+20. Together, these policy processes are a framework for a comprehensive approach, providing greater clarity and certainty to government, business and investors. To achieve this goal in 2015, we need 2014, this coming year, to be a year of scaled-up action and of greater political leadership. Like some of you, I'm sure, I participated in COP19 in Warsaw just 2 weeks ago. My overriding impression from that international meeting was one of deep concern due to the almost complete absence of political will to move beyond short-term and narrow interests. It's often said that business is key to building political will by demonstrating and communicating to political leaders what is possible. In this case, by highlighting efforts being made to reduce emissions and make the transition to sustainable development. What more can business leaders, with support from other actors, do to move governments to take brave steps and make a clear commitment to a new model of development? One that can support with innovation, new technologies and increased investment. I think this is something this forum can think about. In order to act, governments need to feel supported by their citizens and especially by the key players in their economies' business. The UN Secretary-General is organising a Leaders' Summit in September 2014, which will provide a platform for business, governments and civil society to demonstrate action. So the time is short between now and then for businesses and civil society to engage with political leaders at the domestic level, support them to make the commitments to change that are so urgently needed, and work in coalitions of the working, with governments, local authorities and communities to deliver climate actions to the September summit. This approach focuses on the we can aspect of climate action. The other side of the coin is that we must, the moral imperative to act, to avoid the injustice of the impacts of climate change on those who have contributed least to the problem. This is the climate justice approach, linking human rights, development and climate change, to provide compelling narratives for action based on the moral imperative to act and the opportunities of acting now to make an equitable and inclusive transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient development. I've been reflecting a lot on the UN guiding principles, and I believe that these same UN guiding principles on human rights and business provide an important tool for moving us all in the right direction. At the BSR conference in San Francisco last month, or no, it was in October, in the meetings with business at COP19, there was considerable interest from business in using the same framework, the Protect, Respect and Remedy framework and guiding principles to address climate justice. I would urge all of you to see the year ahead as an opportunity to bring the discussions on business and human rights centred here in Geneva to this critical and related agenda. It's now recognised that climate change has an adverse impact on human rights. So action by business to avoid infringing on those rights fits with this approach. As increasing numbers of businesses around the world embrace and implement the UN Guiding Principles, it's a logical next step to use them to address the impacts of climate change and promote more sustainable development. As you know, the Guiding Principles make clear that all businesses have responsibility to put in place policies and processes to respect human rights. All of these measures apply equally to climate justice. For example, A policy commitment to minimise contributions to the causes of climate injustice, that is, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions which cause climate change and undermine human rights. This commitment could also embrace adaptation to climate change and the need to build resilience in the face of climate risks. B, a due diligence process which includes integrated impact assessments of environmental and human rights factors, and which seeks to minimise the contribution of business to greenhouse gas emissions while maximising positive investments and actions to increase resilience to climate impacts and enable the transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient development. C, business engagement in processes to remediate the negative impacts of climate change on human rights. This could be through support for adaptation and disaster risk reduction, or through remediation of unmanageable climate impacts, such as we saw very sadly and recently the extreme events like Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, or sea level rise, or glacial retreat. While attributing responsibility to a particular state or business is not yet possible scientifically, an acceptance that all fossil fuels are contributing to the problem should be enough to engage business in respecting the human rights of those whose lives, livelihoods and indeed cultures are at risk, and taking measures to protect them. So 2014 can be and needs to be a year of action, a year in which business, working with a range of partners, shows political leaders what can be done, demands of them the policy certainty needed to instigate a rapid transformation of the global economy, and makes them feel supported in committing to bold action. It can also be the year in which business embraces climate change as a human rights issue and integrates it into the growing work being done to implement the guiding principles on business and human rights. So just as they're relevant to the concerns of indigenous peoples, I claim they're also relevant to addressing the problems of the unjust impact of climate, meaning climate justice. That means that as the post-2015 agenda unfolds and new development goals are developed, climate change and human rights must be central and closely linked. Business can play an important role in contributing to development and the delivery of global public goods if it respects human rights. This also means an important role for government in seeing to it that the right incentives and disincentives to respect human rights are in place to steer business practice, including through shaping public-private partnerships that are rights-respecting, rights-promoting, and place clear emphasis on accountability. So let me close at this stage by returning to my earlier point about where the debate on business and human rights was in 2003 and where we find ourselves a decade later at the end of 2013. I should note that I'm of course aware of the criticism that some of the guiding principles aren't providing a robust enough tool for ensuring that states fulfil their duties of holding corporations accountable for actions which cause or contribute to rights abuses. The guiding principles provide for a wide range of preventative action which avoids or reduces adverse impacts. But indeed, as John Ruggie, the chair last year, stressed at last year's forum, accountability gaps for the most egregious human rights abuses require further coordinated action on the part of states. And I'm pleased that the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, with the support of the working group, has initiated a process that aims to shed more light on the factors that create barriers in access to justice, with a view to seeking solutions that will be effective in practice. We should recall that the guiding principles make clear that legal and practical barriers can prevent legitimate cases involving business-related human rights abuse from being addressed. The implications of such barriers can be particularly acute for victims of gross human rights abuses. As part of their duty to provide access to effective remedies, states must make concerted efforts to reduce barriers that could lead to a denial of access to justice. This is particularly pressing when it comes to corporate involvement with gross abuses, conduct that rises to the level of internationally recognised crimes. We find ourselves today in the truly anomalous situation where such conduct by states is prescribed by international law, but the corporate form still provides companies with impunity. That's something that has to be addressed. Perhaps home and host states should begin to focus on ways of eliminating this yawning gap. I would urge all stakeholders here, and it's wonderful, as you said, Chairperson, to see the different stakeholders flagged and the numbers present. I would urge all stakeholders here to be supportive of efforts to find a new way forward that builds on the consensus achieved through the guiding principles and moves us closer to full, effective implementation. So 2014 will be a busy year on many fronts, and it has to be. There's too much at stake not to act now, and we are all responsible. We all have a part to play, and the name of the game is action, implementation, action, implementation. Thank you very much.
And thanks, Madam Robinson, for her important and inspirational statement. Honestly, she is still energetic, as usual. So now invite Mr. Aron Kremer from Business for Social Responsibility. Mr. Cramer is outnumbered by ladies in the panel, so you have to speak better. You have the floor.
I won't touch your comment, Mr. Chairman. I'll just try to do my best. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here, and I think your presence here today speaks very loudly about the progress that indeed has been made. As Mary mentioned, it was not that long ago still that many people didn't see the link between business and human rights, and so your presence here today is testament to the fact that that our view of the world has changed, and changed in some very important ways, because human rights will really only be firmly on the world's agenda if it is also firmly on the business agenda. And thanks to the work of governments, civil society organizations, business, and indeed individuals around the world, many of you in this room, all of you in this room, a good deal of progress has been made. But we also know that there is quite a distance still to travel. BSR at our annual conference a few weeks ago, where indeed we had the honor of hearing from Mary Robinson there, as she mentioned, we conducted a survey with GlobeScan of over 700 people working on corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility, and they named human rights as the top challenge in terms of integrating corporate responsibility into their business strategies and operations. So people whose job it is to work on this agree that there still is distance to travel. My comments will come in the context of the work that we as an organization do at BSR in a range of ways, working with individual companies, with a working group of 30 companies across sectors working to implement the guiding principles, work to help launch important multi-stakeholder efforts like the Global Network Initiative, etc. And we see many things changing. You know, I had the privilege in June of this year to participate in a meeting in Myanmar which had members of the former junta, the military government, in direct dialogue with people who were not that long ago political prisoners, talking about how Myanmar was evolving and the role that human rights played in that. And international business took a very strong interest in that dialogue. It's important, I think, for us all to take a step back and recognize some of these things which, frankly, not that long ago would have been nearly impossible to imagine. So there is progress. And yet, as I say, we do have a distance to travel. First and foremost, many more companies need to get on board. The guiding principles have been the latest catalyst inspiring more companies to apply human rights principles across what they do in business. However, it is still a minority of companies around the world that have really taken this on, that apply the guiding principles, that have taken steps to train their staffs, to set targets, to hold people accountable, to build partnerships, both within business-to-business partnerships, and also multi-stakeholder partnerships, who have a voice with national governments to promote greater respect for human rights. So there is still a long ways to go. This forum is an excellent platform, and the UN deserves great credit for building on the momentum created by the guiding principles, but more companies really do need to get on board. How will that happen? Well, as we think ahead to 2014, I'd like to outline 4 steps that I think are important as we look ahead and build on the momentum, learn from experiences that have been gained over the past few years. And again, the first step is simply for more companies to come to the table. My hope would be that at the 3rd forum next year, that business representation is much closer to the 33% that would represent a degree of balance with states and with civil society. I think we all recognize that we are far from that figure here today and this week, and it's something that we really should look to improve. Step 2 is to move human rights further into core business operations. Very often, new issues that land on the business agenda end up being handled in staff positions, public affairs, the general counsel's office, etc. And that's very important. That can be an instigator of change. But we need to see an acceleration of the integration of human rights into core business practices like procurement, like product development, like M&A activity, because those are the places where ultimately the real decisions are made and where human rights really sink roots inside a company and become the kind of consideration that is always present. Human rights, if you will, has a seat at the table when every business decision is made, when every new market is considered for entry, etc., etc. Progress is being made, but we've got a distance to travel. Step 3 is to look at systemic change. The best companies in the world are also the ones that are most acutely aware of the limitations of what they can do alone, and that's certainly true on human rights. Human rights issues often end up involving business because of multiple failures, market failures, governance failures, etc. Bad laws, ineffective global governance, many ills that we can point to that end up eroding or thwarting the kinds of strong and fair and transparent legal systems that protect human rights. These systemic problems can only be resolved with systemic solutions, and that requires all actors to collaborate: business, government, civil society, and labor. One only has to look at the terrible tragedies we've seen in Bangladesh over the last 12 months to understand the depth and the interlocking of the challenges that led to the tragedy at Rana Plaza. It will never be enough simply for business to take further steps, just as it wouldn't be enough for government to act without business coming forward and without civil society and organized labor having the opportunity to act freely. It really does take all segments of society, and business, therefore, can do quite a lot to help to foster and participate in these kinds of systemic solutions. Step 4, and this is the thing that I think has gotten less attention than the other 3, is to look at the intersection of human rights and business innovation. Innovation is one of the things that business really uniquely brings to the world. New products, new services, new opportunities for employment, new ways to live our lives, and they can often be very exciting. Very often business innovation happens without consideration, though, in advance of social impact, environmental impact. And so there's a disconnection between the innovation engine inside companies at times and those inside companies who are thinking about topics like human rights. And we only have to think about advances in technology to understand that when human rights are considered along with innovation, we all prosper better, and that innovation is going to have much more strong and stable roots in society. We're going to see advances in biotechnology that will utterly remake how we think about ourselves as human beings over the next 25 years. These are the kinds of things that are coming. We're seeing the rise of commercial drones, which are going to raise all sorts of new questions about privacy and other things that, on the one hand, offer very significant and exciting advances, and on the other hand, raise some very fundamental questions. So these are things that are going to be happening. They create a lot of excitement. They create a lot of market opportunity. And we have to think about what the human rights implications of these things are in advance. Very important, and that's the fourth step. Lastly, I want to really underline what Mary is saying, that we've got about 24 months between now and COP21 in Paris, when we really do need to deliver a strong, decisive set of commitments on climate change. And climate change, while it shows up in our environment, it is a human issue, it's a human rights issue, it's an economic development issue. And we as a community will do well to think about it in this way. And the human rights community, including the business community, can and should be very energized in calling on governments and frankly, in helping to educate citizens and consumers about the choice, because ultimately we need a healthy climate to support the kind of human development that will also both come from and also help to catalyze an environment in which rule of law is respected. These things are intertwined, and our thinking has to be similarly holistic, and the next 24 months are very, very important. Ultimately, human rights are good business. Without respect for human rights, business can't succeed. We won't solve the world's most pressing challenges, and we won't capture the great opportunity of the 21st century, which is building an inclusive and prosperous world for a planet with 9 billion people. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Aron Kremer for his important statement. Now, I invite Madam Aisha Abdullahi from African Union Commission. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished Chairperson of the UN Working Group on Human Rights and Business, distinguished members of the Working Group, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished representatives of the civil society and business people, distinguished participants, good afternoon. It's a great privilege for me to address the second annual UN Forum on Human Rights and Business on behalf of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I would like to thank the organizers of this forum for the kind invitation extended to the African Union Commission to be part of this important event. The African continent, richly endowed with natural resources, has witnessed decades of numerous human rights challenges resulting from a diverse range of factors, which include war, poverty, corruption, autocratic governance, amongst others. It is against this background that member states of the African Union solemnly undertook to promote and safeguard freedom, justice, equality, and human dignity in Africa by putting in place instruments to reinforce these values. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights, adopted on the 27th of June 1981, forms the basis of the African human rights system. It not only covers internationally accepted human rights standards, but also recognizes values that are unique to the African continent. It encompasses civil and political rights, economic and social rights, cultural rights, individual and group rights, and includes duties of the individual to the society. Concerned about the scourge of conflicts on the continent, African leaders decided to establish the African Governance Architecture, codenamed AGA, and its platform to support member states in their efforts to promote democracy, good governance, human rights, and the rule of law. The platform presents a framework through which many of the stakeholders on governance, democracy, and human rights will influence the process of facilitating accession to and ratification of the AU instruments, but more importantly, their domestication, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. We believe that the African Governance Platform is a unique tool to strengthen capacity and deepen our understanding of issues of human and people's rights, democracy, and governance, which constitute our African shared values, and of course, universal shared values. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in April 2011, the African Union organs adopted the action plan of the Human Rights Strategy for Africa. The strategy is meant to address current weaknesses in the human rights system in Africa, as well as to bring convergence in the working methods of the human rights institutions and actors on the continent, on one hand, and between these regional mechanisms and universal ones on the other hand. As a fruit of the strategy, several coordination and interaction meetings between the African Union and the UN human rights special procedures are held on a regular basis and could succeed in enhancing the level of cooperation and collaboration between the global and continental human rights systems. It is of particular relevance to our forum to note that the strategy also focuses on issues related to human rights and business, because the business and human rights agenda link closely with key socio-economic and political developments on the African continent. Growth in GDP, foreign direct investment, extraction of vast natural resources, and the global demand for minerals all render the UN guiding principles on business and human rights of particular importance to the African continent. Regional governance frameworks and state and business practices will constitute valuable tools to address business-related human rights challenges in Africa. The global efforts to promote corporate respect for human rights, accountability, and access to remedy for those adversely impacted or affected by business operations can reinforce and complement the work undertaken at the regional level. The clarity provided by the guiding principles on the notion of states and business duties and responsibilities offers a common platform for reinforcing endeavors taken both at local and regional levels. African civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, and regional mechanisms have become strong advocates of better governance structures to monitor the implication of business transactions on human rights, particularly in the face of growing foreign investment on our continent. Many have already taken up the UN guiding principles and the protect, respect, and remedy framework upon which the principles rest in their work to address adverse impacts and advocate for responsible business conduct and sustainable solutions. The UN guiding principles present opportunities for efforts at the regional level in Africa by integrating the framework, relevant policies and strategies, and collaborating with the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. The recently agreed framework of cooperation between the UN and African human rights institutions also presents opportunities for integration of the guiding principles, thus ensuring greater convergence and coherent concerted action for addressing business-related human rights challenges in Africa. A number of other relevant mechanisms present further opportunities for convergence. In this regard, we are confident that the UN Working Group on Human Rights and Business will join hands with the Working Group of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on Extractive Industries to promote the development of a comprehensive framework governing corporate operations in a manner respectful to human rights. In the same vein, the African Union is planning to join forces with the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights during the course of the year 2014, which my sister described as the action year and also the implementation year, to hold a regional forum on business and human rights. This will constitute to joining the dots and building mutual interlinkages between global and regional efforts and strengthen the regional movement to address corporate practice that impact negatively on enjoyment of human rights across the African continent. This will also provide a unique opportunity to bring together for the first time a wide range of stakeholders, some of them with contrasting points of view, to openly discuss how governments and businesses can move forward to address the impacts of business activities on human rights on the continent. It would be key also to contribute to the promotion of a community of practice and constructive dialogue on business and human rights amongst governmental institutions, regional bodies, businesses, industry, associations, civil society, national human rights institutions, and other relevant stakeholders. Identifying challenges and ways to overcome them, as well as learning from existing good practices, represent another core aim of this forum. Finally, an Africa Regional Forum on Business and Human Rights holds great potential for widening awareness of standards, contributing to capacity building of relevant actors, and leveraging ongoing efforts with a view to transforming business practice on the ground. Once again, I would like, on behalf of the African Union Commission, to express our appreciation to the UN Working Group on Human Rights and Business and the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for a job well done. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Madam, for your insightful statement. Now I invite distinguished Mr. William Echikson from Google Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of all of you. I arrived a little late to the conference, but I recognized and appreciated the fact that the Internet and the high-tech industry was often included in the debates that I managed to listen to. And I think that's obviously why I'm here, because human rights and the Internet are a very topical and important subject. And I think we're at a crucial time now, from Google's perspective, of the future of the Internet. I mean, if we look, the Internet basically came into widespread use only 2 decades ago. And in that time, it has brought great economic, social, and political benefits. I mean, just before the Internet, a small elite controlled access to information. Now everybody in this room has the ability to reach a global audience with the click of their mouse. So I'm sure you're all tweeting what I'm saying or going to post a blog about it. But it is pretty incredible how, in the speed that we've all managed to gain access to a global distribution system for information. Now, there are nearly 3 billion people online now. And we're working hard. I believe we recognize that all 7 billion of the world's population has and should be soon online. So in Africa, for example, we're using the white spaces. We're sending balloons up over New Zealand. And businesses, I think, are doing a good job to spread the access to the internet. But let me give you, just to continue on the positive side of the ledger, it really is incredible, the explosion of information that we're seeing and the increased access to that information. You know, if I'd come here, I think the last time I was in Geneva at the UN Human Rights Council was 2.5 years ago. And at that time, we would have said that there were 34 hours or 36 hours of YouTube going up online every minute. Now, there's 100 hours of YouTube, of video being uploaded every minute. There are more than 300,000 words that are being published every minute just on Google's own Blogger. That's 3 books a minute. And there's 750 million websites compared only 20 years ago to 623. 750 million compared to 623. Now, all of this is changing the world, and we hope and believe for the better. More access to information brings more progress, social and political progress, and economic progress. But at the same time, what we're seeing is an increasing backlash by governments, that more and more governments are censoring, filtering, and blocking. There was a recent study done by the Open Net Initiative of 87, I believe it was 87 countries, and it found that in more than half of them, 44 or so, there was some form of government intervention of blocking, censoring, and filtering. Now, at Google, we operate in about 150 countries around the world, and at any one time, because it changes every day I'll go into the office and find that YouTube is blocked in another country or that Blogger is blocked. But at any one time, on average, it's 25 countries, 25 out of the 150 countries where some of our services or all of our services are not available. Now, this issue of increasing government crackdown on the internet isn't just really from the usual suspects. No. It's also democratic states. In places like, I'll name them, Brazil and India, there are difficulties with liability for internet companies, internet platforms. And even here in Europe, where I work most of the time, we're facing increasing pressures from courts and governments to filter, and there's no other way to describe it. We recently lost a court case in France, in Paris, which will require us, if we lose on appeal, to build an internet filter to block the results for certain searches, even though we have an effective way of bringing down illegal material when we're informed of it. But the idea of protectively or proactively blocking to create a real censorship machine, even here in Europe, is to us frightening. And needless to say, we're appealing, and there are a number of these types of court cases around Europe. Another big threat that we see is increasing government control or government demands to govern the internet by themselves. Now, one of the reasons I was so delighted to participate here was that it really is a multi-stakeholder initiative. I mean, there are businesses, there's civil society, and their governance. And that's how the internet was built. It was built from the market, bottom up, not top down. And that's its success, because it's proved incredibly flexible in dealing with new challenges, incredibly flexible in bringing on online populations that were not online before, incredibly powerful in generating new content and new ideas. And yet, what we are seeing is more and more governments want, through the UN and even an agency near here in the same city, to take control of that type of internet and to replace it with a government-only internet. And finally, and I think this is the issue perhaps that's been in the most headlines recently, there's the issue of government surveillance. There's more and more of a problem, obviously, with the recent revelations that our governments, whether legal through legal means or extra legal means, it's unclear, are requesting and taking information from users. And I want to be clear that at Google, we didn't build or give a backdoor to the American government or to any government, that our policy has always been to obey legal court orders, but to try to restrict them to the narrowest and most to the narrowest extent, and to inform the users whose information has been forced to be handed over about what has happened, if that is possible legally. This issue of government surveillance is very important because it cuts the trust between users and the internet. And I know I'm not a compliance lawyer, that much of the discussion at these at this conference has been about the UN guiding principles. I can only say that I think a lot of the responses we've taken have been inspired, or at least reflect some of the spirit that's involved in those principles. So what are we doing to try to keep the internet free and open? Well, the first priority, and I was hearing it in other conferences today, is transparency. At Google, we published the first transparency report back in 2010, and it detailed the number of requests we get to take down content or to hand over information on users to governments. It also detailed whenever traffic on the internet in a country was cut. Now, over the 3 years, we've seen a dramatic rise in these requests that we're getting from governments. We just released the latest 6-month update, and it showed a 200% rise since we've begun collating this. What I think is important is that we're seeing more and more companies believe in transparency. Other internet companies have started publishing their own transparency reports. And what we'd like to see, because obviously it's just companies, individual companies, is to get a national report on transparency, on the state of content removals and user requests from governments. So I've begun working with NGOs in 6 European countries to produce such types of national transparency reports. And the first one came out last spring in Estonia, and we expect to see others published soon. And I think that the momentum towards increased transparency, not just from companies but from governments, will continue and is necessary to restore the trust that in many ways has been broken. Another initiative has been, and I'm glad that my German Brooks of the Global Network Initiative is here, is the Global Network Initiative, which we began with Microsoft and Yahoo as companies, with NGOs, and with investors and academics as a multi-stakeholder response. It conducts official independent audits of our performance on human rights issues, on the issues we've discussed of handing over information on users and others. It provides a formula for dialogue. And until last year, it was basically an American network initiative because most of the participants were American and no European companies were involved. But I'm happy to say that we've now have a dialogue with the European telco companies, 9 of them. And I attended the first meeting several weeks ago in Brussels, and it was really constructive to hear the challenges they face, which are similar but slightly different than ours. And I hope that dialogue will lead to some fruitful resolution, even them joining the Global Network Initiative. Another issue is we've worked hard for reform of internet governance. We recognize that ICANN needs to become more international and have supported that move. And we're looking forward to participating in the upcoming Internet Governance Conference in Brazil. We see this as an opportunity because it is a multi-stakeholder, civil society, governments, and business working together, all equal. So, just to conclude, I think we've seen that we're at a key moment for the future of the Internet. It was built, this new network that connects us all and will connect more and more of us, has been built from bottom up. It's been market-driven, it's been businesses, governments, and civil society all together, and it's been a great success. It's democratized access to information, and we should gather together to keep it free and open, because now we are faced between a choice of an open internet or a closed internet, closed in by national borders, closed in by government control, and so forth. And we should all, I hope, gather together to stop that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Echikson. You know, to my student, I always advise, if you don't know history of the term, ask Professor Google. All right, so now is the time to invite Madame Debbie Stothard from International Federation for Human Rights and Altsean. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished members of the working group, my esteemed fellow panelists, dear friends. At the opening session last year, I introduced to you men, women, and children who had been killed after the adoption of the guiding principles because they spoke up against human rights violations by companies. A year later, most of the victims' families are still denied justice. Even more defenders have been killed. Just last Sunday, in Brazil, Ambrosio Villavia, a Guarani Kaiwa land activist opposing large-scale agribusiness, was stabbed to death. Halting and preventing impunity perpetuated and perpetrated through complicity of state and business should be our top priority. Testimonies from affected communities and victims at this forum clearly tell us there is a huge reality gap between the stated commitments of states and corporations and actual action. This could be because of those who don't know any better, or because of those who know better but refuse to act better. In any case, we must work urgently to halt and prevent future violations. Land and environmental defenders throughout the world continue to be high on the hit list of violators, even in countries like Myanmar or Burma, which is detaining land and environmental defenders even at the same time that they are releasing political prisoners. Instead of labeling them as criminals, enemies of development, or even terrorists, land and environmental defenders must be respected as relevant stakeholders in the meaningful consultation emphasized by guiding principle number 18. On the subject of meaningful consultation, too often women, including indigenous women, continue to be excluded or ignored by companies. Come on, folks, this is the 21st century. Last month, the People's Forum on Human Rights and Business met in Bangkok, and many of the priorities reflect key concerns raised at this forum. This includes how non-judicial remedies have sometimes been perverted into anti-justice measures. The UN Security Council Resolution 1325 declares rape in war to be a non-amnestiable offense. However, in business, this is different. In the case of a Canadian gold mine in Papua New Guinea, where women were subject to gang rape over several years by employees of the mine, victims were given chickens for a livelihood program. Not justice. Loretta Rosales, representing national human rights institutions, noted at this forum that both judicial and non-judicial measures must be part of the same continuum to ensure justice for victims. She also noted that the main problem with the guiding principles is that they are non-binding. Yesterday, Joseph Stiglitz also emphasized that regulation is needed to address the cross-border impacts of business activities. The time is right to work towards a binding framework to ensure state and corporate accountability. Companies doing the right thing should be welcoming this because it will help their less committed peers join them and create a level playing field. This will also allow companies to stick to their human rights principles when pressured by states to do otherwise. States, including those few engaged in national action plans, should welcome a binding framework because it will ensure that their companies' interests will not be harmed for respecting human rights. This idea of a binding framework is a worthy extension of John Ruggie's legacy. He did note that the guiding principles are a first step. A binding framework will address gaps in the principles and ensure a victim-oriented approach in implementation. For some of us, a binding framework has the potential to be this generation's Geneva Convention. I say this because when you go out into the field and you see the impacts of grievous and systematic human rights violations linked to business activities on people and the environment, it is hard not to think that this impact on the ground is akin to that of war. The preventive value of a binding framework, especially in the context of serious crimes that Mary Robinson described, cannot be underestimated. A common refrain that we hear when we consider business and human rights is that change takes time. Well, many victims have been waiting for decades for remedy and justice. It doesn't take much time for harmful business projects to devastate entire communities and ecosystems. The global community, people, state, and business cannot afford to wait, especially as we head towards the next Millennium Development Goal period. One final priority. We need to expand and strengthen the mandate of the working group. We need to ensure that the working group is given the teeth and the testicles, figuratively speaking, of course, to get the job done. Final word, Mr. Chair.
I thank Madam Devi Stothard for her comment. I would like to thank the member of our closing panel for their useful reflection. I would like to open the floor for intervention. So as in the first day, any party that interested to make intervention, please move to the first floor of this seat. The state will be on the left side of mine, the business is in front of mine, and the civil society will be in my right side. I start with state. Yeah, you have the floor, sir.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. أود باسم دولة قطر أن أتقدم.
Thank you very much, Chairman. On behalf of Qatar, I wanted to thank the panelists for the statements that they've made. I also wanted to thank the working group for everything that it has done in order to make sure that this forum was a success. I'm particularly thinking about the work that's been done on the guidelines on business and human rights. Now, this forum is being held at a time when the Human Rights Council and other stakeholders are devoting great attention to this issue. The discussions over the past 2 days have shown us that the guidelines are a way forward when it comes to business and human rights. The different sessions of the forum have allowed us to get a better understanding of the guiding principles and all aspects relating to their implementation. I wanted to let you know that the state of Qatar is going to be working with all stakeholders at local, regional and international level to ensure that the United Nations framework is fully implemented in this respect. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank you and thank for your management of time. The business part? Yes. Yes, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's Adam Green from the U.S. Council for International Business, and I have a streak going of speaking in every session I'm in, so I wanted to finish off strongly. I really just wanted to make 2 key points. The first was that one of the key strengths that Professor Ruggie brought to the mandate was building consensus. And he did a very good job of doing that. But consensus needs care and feeding. And we need to invest in time and effort to maintain that consensus in terms of what we're doing. I'll say it openly. I'm slightly concerned by some of the discussion at this year's forum. Again, even though the guiding principles have only been around for roughly a year or so, 2 years, already we're having the same discussion about the need for a binding international convention, which the guiding principles are not an alternative for, but it was recognized that there are very significant political and practical issues with trying to take that approach. And I do fear that if we go back into that debate, that will be a very critical, harmful element to the consensus that he helped to build over 6 years. So just to flag again, I think we all need to invest in maintaining the consensus that he helped to build. And one way that might be done, as a hopefully useful suggestion, is to bring this kind of forum down to a national level. We're integrating this discussion into national discussions, national dialogues that bring all the parties together within a more limited context with people that will see each other over and over and over again and can build that trust and common sense of purpose at a national level may be easier than, to some extent, than at the international level. And it may also get down to some of the root cause issues, which will be different in different countries. And that's why I think a national dialogue may be useful. But many of the root cause issues that I flagged last year are still out there and still really weren't flagged in this forum, which relate to informality and corruption. If you really tried to boil down the two, to define some of the key root causes of many of the challenges we face, informality and corruption, which usually go together. Any country with big informality also has big corruption. Those two
time is up. Yeah?
Present the
Please
biggest
conclude
challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The civil society.
Gracias.
Thank you. I come from Ivisina Marca. My name is Aymara. My country is Bolivia. I wanted to thank the working group for the annual report for 2013. A report which was centered on indigenous peoples. It's a report which has a very firm interpretation of the Declaration of indigenous peoples and ILO Convention 169 and how this should tie in with the guiding principles. I suggest that in the future work and activities of the working group that you continue to work in this way to make sure that there is true fulfillment of the rights of indigenous peoples. I would like to see these recommendations and this report used by states and by business, but also by ourselves, by indigenous peoples, by civil society that is helping processes take place for indigenous peoples. All of this to ensure that these different views of development are understood by the other two stakeholders. Obviously, it is a difficult relationship, that between states, businesses, and indigenous peoples. We hope that the work that is done henceforth by the working group will be able to focus specifically on indigenous women and children. There are really a great number of communities of women, of children from indigenous communities that have absolutely no access to their rights and their fundamental freedoms in the states in which they live. They are not able to live on their lands.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I invite Ambassador of Indonesia, State?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My delegation would like to congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, for your skillful and resources leadership in guiding our meeting to further progress in the implementation of the guiding principle and its three pillars. Equally, we would like to thank the panelists for their insightful and futuristic observation. My delegation shares the strategic value of the guiding principles to the deliberation of the post-2015 development agenda and wishes to offer the following points for consideration. First, despite there is a human rights abuse by companies, we have to be fully aware of the company's significant contribution to the promotion of all human rights, including the rights to the development, both in the context of local and national level. We also share the view that the current opportunities to enhance effort to further promote and protect human rights has been possible partly due to the contribution of the economic growth we derive from the activity of the business. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, a constructive and integrated approach should be carried out by all parties with the framework and guiding principles as the main point of reference. To do this, all stakeholders should have adequate understanding and capacity to act. Therefore, the capacity building, sharing best practices and experience, as well as the technical cooperation in this field is pertinent. All parties, states, businesses, and civil society should share their knowledge and experience to the promotion and protection of human rights. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ambassador. From business side.
My name is David Wofford. I'm with Meridian Group International, and as the world doesn't divide neatly into three sectors, I do work for a business, but we do development projects around the world, so I'm not sure whether it's civil society or business, but I am a business. I'd like to make two recommendations to the working group, one of which is we run a project called the Raise Health Initiative funded by USAID, And one of the big things we're concerned about is at this conference is that health and reproductive health rights are a huge issue for development around the world and protecting human rights. And would like the working group to add that to an agenda, because there's been very little discussion in the ones I've talked about gender and reproductive rights and health rights that go beyond, in my opinion, just occupational health and safety and do no harm. Second recommendation I'd like to make to the working group is, in all due respect to Adam's point, I think Aron's point about innovation is really important. And while we need to focus on remedies and the various kinds of things that need to be done, in fact, we know that business can have a much more innovative role in transforming societies. And I'll point to BSR's HER project of one of many innovative activities that have shown not only to improve the health and empowerment of women at the workplace, but also carries over to the communities. And if we're not thinking beyond just remedies, which are incredibly important, and I don't mean to in any way belittle that, but if we're not thinking about how we can make transformative change, so you're not about remedy, but improving the lives of women and men across the world, then we're not taking the advantage of the opportunities we have. So I would really like to have the working group focus and think about this progressive agenda in addition to the do no harm agenda. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen from the panel section, what you say today is impressive and was excellent, because that's what I was expecting from those 4 days meetings. When you're talking about low carbon societies, that's what I love to hear from speakers. A second point is that about role of businesses. Myself, I'm a CSO, but the fact is I'm a social business person, and social business means you get profit and you invested all your profit for the development of the community. About France, yes, of course, France is always against multinational societies, especially Google's and Microsoft. Just because multinational societies, France fears multinational societies because they don't have headquarters, you don't know where the money is, and France also fears about losing its population. So the government of France is in like a piece of ham in a sandwich. You know, on the top are the multinationals, and on underneath are the local regional powers, which are most of the time people organization powers. So I hope internet could help people in the ways that empowering people would be nice. And I love internet myself on the technical side, and I understand that Googles can help people to survive and to develop and to empower the population for access to human rights. But think about also profit. Profit has to help people as well to survive too. Thank you.
Thank you. May I invite Ambassador of Canada?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Canada has listened with keen interest to the rich discussions during this forum. The promotion and protection of human rights and the rule of law are long-standing priorities for Canada, including where they intersect with economic activity. In this regard, I would like to highlight a few principles that inform the Canadian government approach. First, Canada encourages and expects all Canadian companies working around the world to respect all applicable laws and international standards, to operate transparently and in consultation with host governments and local communities, as well as to conduct their activities in a socially and environmentally responsible manner. In addition, Canada is committed to enhancing the CSR practices of Canadian extractive sector companies in their operations abroad. This commitment is embodied in the Government of Canada's CSR strategy for the extractive sector. Further, Canada's network of diplomatic missions abroad actively promotes CSR through seminars, conferences, and other activities in countries where extractive sector companies are active. Canada is also actively engaged in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, works closely with Canadian companies on ways to align their operations with internationally recognized standards, such as the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises and the voluntary principles on security and human rights, and has 2 voluntary dispute resolution mechanisms available, Canada's national contact point for the OECD guidelines, and Canada's CSR counselor for the extractive sector. The discussions so far this week have provided important food for thought as we continuously seek to enhance our own work in promoting the business and human rights agenda broadly and the UN guiding principles in particular. As we move forward in the context of the next forum, we would welcome further discussion on innovative and practical approaches to the implementation of the guiding principles and on how to better harmonize existing initiatives. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam. I give the floor to the business one.
Thank you. My name is Robert Grabosch. I'm an attorney at a law firm in Berlin. And I'm partly excited to have been here, but also a little bit disappointed. It is good to see that lawyers are finally acknowledging that they have a role to play with helping their clients to respect human rights. But sadly, there is still little recognition of how far-reaching the legal issues really are. When, for instance, a corporate officer tells us that she is aware of her legal duty to take care that her business abides by the law and doesn't cause damage, but that she is just not sure what exactly her duty of care implies in a difficult parent-subsidiary relationship or in a global supply chain, we will find hardly any guidance in the law. So what measures are reasonably expected of a prudent corporate officer? The ones that the guiding principles and other soft law instruments outline. It would be great if the working group could make a clear statement on whether the guiding principles can be helpful for business persons and lawyers when it comes to the carrying out of legal duties of care. Also, little attention is paid to the question of which clauses businesses should put into their contracts with commercial agents, business partners, or subsidiaries in order to avoid human rights impact. One more area of law that is overlooked is competition law. Competition is, after all, the reason for why businesses are often involved in negative human rights impact. But we have very good competition laws all over Europe, and commercial practices that are unfair are also illegal and can be proceeded against by competitors. The Federal Court of Justice of Germany has ruled that as we interpret the term unfair commercial practice, we need to look at internationally agreed on human rights standards. And the court has also ruled that what these unfair commercial practices are can be interpreted by human rights treaties. Exploiting host state standards that are lower than home state standards is not as such unfair, but the court also said that when the host state standard falls below basic moral requirements that all societies should meet, then a business practice can be unfair in terms of competition law. It would be helpful if lawyers would address these legal opportunities in their consultations and in contract drafting, but this is difficult for lawyers as it is a very sensitive subject. And the working group has not yet advised the business community to seek legal tools to ensure that they and others meet the expectations raised at them. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to civil society.
Brenda Hernández de la Unidad de Protección.
I come from the unit to defend human rights defenders in Guatemala, and I'd like to say that it is a concern for us to see that despite that the intention of this event is to bring together the three parties, that in fact in the panels we don't see a representation of the International Labour Organization, which is, of course, part of the United Nations family. Now, very many of our interests relate to trade union activity, certainly my organization, but we've heard very much that is of great concern, for example, what's happening to trade union activists in Colombia. We already do have within the system a very important instrument, but I don't see that it's been given due consideration within this panel. So let me say once again, we don't want the principles to just be a reference point. They must urge compliance with all of the treaties and agreements that are already in place and that their states must abide by. Thank you.
Thank you. May I give the floor to distinguished delegate of Honduras, Ecuador?
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, sir. Ecuador welcomes the efforts that have been made as part of this second United Nations Forum on Business and Human Rights. We recognize the importance of any forum for a dialogue between stakeholders which aims to identify the challenges that remain in implementing the guiding principles that are certainly a good first step, but that can and must be improved. We are aware that there are very many changes in the economic and social sector that have played in favor of large corporations that have created inequality with states, and that this affects the interests of victims of human rights violations, and it's limited their access to fair reparation mechanisms at national, regional, and international level. This situation that we can see at various levels creates large-scale impunity despite the will and the efforts made by states to try and provide reparation for violations. For this reason, the creation of an international binding instrument has been a concern for Ecuador and of other states as well as civil society since the beginning of the debate. Recently, during the 24th Ordinary Session of the Human Rights Council, Ecuador led a joint initiative supported by 85 countries, including the African and Arab group, on the possibility of negotiating an instrument of this kind. We believe that its adoption, together with the guiding principles, would strengthen the promotion and protection of human rights and the provision of remedy, as well as clarifying the relationship between the various stakeholders. We would therefore like to invite you to a workshop on human rights and transnational corporations, paving the way for an international binding instrument, which will be held on the 11th and 12th of March 2014 during the 25th Human Rights Council session. The event will be aiming to raise awareness amongst the international community on the benefits of working on such a binding international instrument to regulate company activity in respect of human rights and to analyse the steps necessary to put it in place. There will be special rapporteurs, the working group, Centro Sur Energy Company and the International Commission of Jurists. Thank you.
Business.
Hi. I'm not exactly a business, but I'm a business student, so I'm speaking on behalf of our future generation that's supposed to come up and take this on further. I think I'm one of the few, so it's been a very interesting and productive experience, but there was something that I wanted to suggest, and I have realized that many of you have spoken on training and development for people who are already into the situation that they are, but I realized that as a business student, no one ever mentioned human rights in any of my courses. So for example, I'm learning about business and what to do, management, HR, supply chain, but not once has human rights been included in my discussions. The only reason why I'm probably involved and interested in this is because I also took a major in political science, so it was sort of forced upon me. And I think that, it's interesting. But for the next generation of leaders, so for our next generation of leaders, where in universities they're going to obtain most of their knowledge for their future jobs, I think that it's important that we should address this also and expand it beyond the scope of civil society, states, and businesses. So it needs to be ingrained in our minds that throughout our academic careers, so that when it comes down to making these pertinent decisions, we have the tools and the skills to be able to make the right ones. And I think that this will advance this whole forum and this whole process a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently if we do that. That's it.
Thank you. I give the floor to the civil society.
Thank you, Chair, for giving this opportunity. My name is Aron Kremer. I'm representing National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights, which is working for the protection and promotion of the Dalit human rights, both in public and private spaces. My colleague, Ms. Debbie, has rightly pointed out the time has come to expand the mandate for the working group. So taking cue from that, we would like to bring the issue of the caste-based discrimination that prohibiting the Dalits to get access to the equal employment opportunities. The government of India has been successfully implementing positive affirmative action by promoting the access to employment for the Dalits and tribals. Unfortunately, the same affirmative action is not expanded to the private sector. And the recent studies shows that many, even though the small initiatives have been taken by the private sector, unfortunately, not much progress has been made. The recent problem which has highlighted the majority of the multinational companies, transnational companies operating in India and South Asia region, somehow they are ignorant either and silent on this issue of addressing caste-based discrimination. While this is an age-old problem, but silence is not the answer. We need the cooperation, we need the collaboration. We are looking forward to working hand with the business sector and the state and the civil society to address this age-old problem. My request, my humble request to the working group is whether we can create a special category called marginalized communities, whereas communities such as Dalits, Buraku community, and other excluded community concerns could be discussed and reported in the working group. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I will have a final round right now. From the state, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The UK would like to thank the organisers and the participants of the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights, and we support the work of the UN Working Group on this issue. We've been heartened by the huge interest of the over 1,700 participants from a wide range of stakeholders in progressing the business and human rights agenda. As you know, the UK launched its action plan to implement the UN guiding principles in September this year, and we are now working hard on an implementation plan. We know others are also developing their plans and will be able to share valuable information on their experience on best practice as well. The UNGPs, UN Guiding Principles, are intended to apply the world over, and we will work for widespread international uptake and implementation of them. We call on businesses and civil society and international partners to give effect to them in the pursuit of improved human rights and sustainable business environments worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Anna Pot. I work for APG Asset Management from the Netherlands. We help pension funds in asset management of their money. Human rights is important for APG as we look into the human rights performance of the companies that we invest in, because we feel it helps us in making better investment decisions. I thought this forum was a very successful forum, and I would congratulate you with this, as it has helped some of the businesses to interact with their stakeholders that have otherwise not have been taken place. And I think this is a very important forum and an important setting to do that. So therefore I would like to make 2 points. The first is, please keep on reaching out to the not yet converted. I realize the people sitting here, we don't need to convert them, but there's many businesses out there that don't know about it and wants to know more about it. And we as investors in these companies would really appreciate if they would learn more about it. And the second point I would like to make here is about, again, to get all the investors on board, more investors on board on this topic. Please help the investment community by providing and collecting information about human rights performance of companies. For us to make it relevant in our investment cases, in our valuation models, we need to have systematic and comparable information about companies and their performances on human rights. And I think that there is a big challenge and a lot of opportunities out there. Thank you.
Thanks. Civil society representation, please.
So I'm coming from Privacy International, an NGO based in London. For the last 20 years, Privacy International has been committed to fighting the right to privacy across the world, and we also investigate the secret world of government surveillance and expose the companies that enable it. First of all, we wanted to thank the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights for including a session on human rights in the digital age, and for inviting Privacy International to be on that panel. The right to privacy and freedom of expression are enablers of human rights, as well as permitting access to other rights, such as the right to association, participation, education, both the right to development, and they form integral elements of any democratic society. Whilst the revelations since June were not surprising to those working in the field, the extent of the revelations were and remain unacceptable. As correctly pointed out by Mr. Echikson from Google, it is no longer the common perpetrators who are being pointed at, but democracies around the world who have and should continue to be committed to their human rights obligations. This has become a problem which concerns all of us, even those who think they have nothing to hide. We hope the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights will start to address the business sector beyond the usual suspects, to include surveillance vendors, but also those who sell technologies with dual uses which can be used for surveillance purposes, which are accessible to states, but also just about anyone wanting to get their hands on them. These technologies enable the violations of human rights, particularly the right to privacy and freedom of expression. We hope this forum will soon address this issue more in depth and follow the footsteps of other sister organizations, such as the UN General Assembly, who will soon be voting on a resolution on the right to privacy in the digital age, as well as UNESCO, who is furthering its work on freedom of expression, privacy and ethics. And we hope this will continue to be a multi-stakeholder process throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. Since the speaker already seated down in the sitting place, I give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Brazil. After that, followed by the civil society. That's it, yeah? Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity for Brazil to speak. Brazil ascribes utmost importance to the relation between entrepreneurial activity and promotion protection of human rights, and welcomes the UN initiative to convene this forum. This domain is the role of IT companies in this domain is very relevant. Brazil is convinced, as reflected in the multi-sectoral framework that regulates the internet governance in the country, of the key role played by companies in enabling the internet to provide all benefits associated with its expansion and unimpeded access to all users as a neutral and suitable environment for the exercise of freedom of opinion and expression in line with safeguards to the right to privacy. For this purpose to be achieved, it is necessary, however, to integrate the businesses in this debate and thus clarify the contents of both their obligations and those incumbent upon states. Brazil will hold a conference in April 2013 on internet governance and considers the UN principles on business and human rights extremely important in that domain. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. I give the floor to civil society.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and let me take this opportunity to welcome back Her Excellency Mary Robinson to this important forum and thank her for reminding us about the importance of action and implementation. I would like to make a suggestion to the working group to consider the global sports industry as a possible case study under all the three pillars of the framework, in particular to focus on the positive contribution it makes to peace and development. And lastly, to recommend to the working group that they participate in the upcoming World Conference on Indigenous Peoples to be held at the UN in September next year, to share more widely to the audience the good work that they're doing on promoting business and human rights. Thank you very much.
Working group, I would like to thank all participants for their cooperation in observing the speaking arrangement of the forum, which were designed to facilitate the maximum dialogue among all stakeholders. We appreciate the spirit of respect and tolerance that pervade these last 3 days. I would like to close by thanking all those here today, as I did during the opening yesterday, taking note especially of the effort of the Office of the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights and the United Nations Conference Services and interpreters in making the forum a success. I would like also to note with gratitude the partners and donors who have provided substantive, organizational and financial support, and recognize the participants who come from far and wide to share their perspective. Finally, I will end by thanking the working group for their expert guidance in the overall direction of the forum and their leadership in bringing the wide range of stakeholders to table. I now hand over the floor to the chair of working group. Thank you.
Estimado presidente.
Distinguished chair, distinguished participants of the forum. I think it really must be said loud and clear that this forum has been different from last year. It has been a tremendously important forum. I think everything that happened last year helped us make changes this year, and we've heard very interesting contributions. We've had almost double the number of participants compared to the ones that we came last year, and very many new faces. And we hope that we will continue to charm new people into an interest in this subject. We've had very high-quality panels. We really were able to strike at the very heart of a number of complex debates during various sessions, such as the need, for example, to make changes to legislation in order to establish rules that allow us to set the degree of blame for various companies and their subsidiaries when they're involved in human rights violations. There's no doubt that this is a highly complex legal matter. And it's definitely an area where we need to shed greater light and need more concerted international cooperation. The forum has also highlighted that there is a number of areas where states must act now, without any further delay, such as, for example, when it comes to the defense of human rights defenders. Business has a key role to play too, to be involved in a dialogue with civil society, to report cases of suspected abuse, and to help set a tone that is an inclusive tone. And civil society, in turn, can also do its bit to make sure that business and human rights as an issue doesn't become polarized as an issue in domestic and international fora, especially in those areas where there's been ethnic or social conflict or armed conflict indeed. The working group would like to share its own reflections as to what we've heard and seen, and something that will help feed into all of our plans for actions henceforth. We've heard many participants talk about how important the guiding principles are and how they continue to be relevant. They provide states a very clear guidance on how to regulate the market, and they also help provide support for sustainable development. And they shed some light for the business sector as to the conduct that's expected of them. So this is an active stance rather than simply reacting to abuse committed. And it's also something that victims can use to accelerate reparations and find tangible solutions. But we need more action than this. Regardless of the actions that we all undertake looking to the future, we simply cannot postpone acting in the here and now. We need much firmer commitments from states as to their national action plans. We're very much aware that there can't be a one-size-fits-all approach, given that there are 192 countries with different circumstances. But countries can have a position, can have annual targets, and have an explicit stance vis-à-vis the companies operating in their territory as to the conduct expected. They can remind businesses that they can contribute to negative effects and are connected to them, and they can be reminded as to expected conduct in all of these cases. Regions have a much stronger role to play, including guiding principles in social responsibility policies and human rights policies of regional bodies. And we also have to think about the public financial institutions operate in the region. And all of this, including the complaints mechanisms, are very important. We're very excited about future cooperation in with regional institutions in Africa, for example, and this will help us hold the next regional forum in 2014. Over the past 2 years, we've seen an important increase in convergence. Different instruments have adopted the guiding principles and have developed human rights chapters within their various protocols. That convergence is very important. It's very important for guiding principles to be included in the post-2015 development agenda, with a view to ensuring that states are clear as to what their obligations are vis-à-vis the conduct of business, and also with a view of promoting the capacity for innovation and the responsibility and accountability of business. Global institutions, the World Bank amongst them, must also work to incorporate the guiding principles, and that's an important consideration. And convergence will be particularly important in this phase where we are looking at the guiding principles in the various sectors, the textiles, agriculture, communications, the financial sector, amongst others. The outlook for the future definitely seem to point to a sectoral implementation of the guiding principles. And when we discuss what this means in practice for each sector, we will be able to make progress on our understanding of implementation and of due diligence. And we will be able to have a clear picture as to how leverage can be used in each industry. The United Nations agencies are becoming increasingly interested in including the guiding principles in their agendas for action, recognizing the special mandates and the different activities of all of these agencies. This year, we had a much greater participation of UNICEF, UNDP, amongst others. I think the challenge will be to make sure that we remain consistent, at least on the message, the broader message, including everyone within the guiding principles, and ensuring that the focus of the guiding principles is to tackle the negative impact of business. Now, that doesn't mean that business can't innovate when it comes to their business model, and they can't be an active partner in promoting rights themselves. We have seen very active participation from national human rights institutions. We have been reminded of the key role that NHRIs play in promoting and protecting human rights. We heard from ombudsmen and other national institutions, and we heard to what extent they're involved in putting in place national plans of action. Some of them play a key role in investigating cases and in dispute settlement. Others, again, provide training to many stakeholders and to peers. The creation of a global fund for training is a priority to make sure that there is a solid financial underlay for all of these activities that we're planning as we look ahead. When it comes to the working group, the message that we've heard loud and clear is that we have to act in a more targeted fashion. Although there's an increasing demand in terms of the number of issues and actions that we must include on our agenda. We certainly need to understand the complex world that is behind each of the 31 guiding principles. We've had roughly 200 suggestions for exploring further cases just this last year. And we have about 160 annual requests asking us to be a strategic part of different processes and this is asking for involvement in an organization, in a country, in a union, in a trade association, speaking to victims, to civil society. And there's no doubt that all of these requests have presented a colossal challenge. Much of this has been fundamental in our view. We are, for example, very happy to see that indigenous peoples are such an active participant in the discussion today. We recognize the needs and the specific situation of indigenous women particularly. There's no doubt that one of the main centers of activity is access to remedies. This has certainly been mentioned in many of our letters of allegation. We have been focusing on the issue of non-judicial remedies and their outcomes, and also how to tackle the impunity of business when faced with severe human rights violations. And we have been working together with the Office of the High Commissioner in this last respect. Now, there's no doubt that we do have to be more targeted when it comes to encouraging states to become further interested and implement in the guiding principles, especially through their national plans of action. In our view, the financial sector and the specific discussions on developing guides for due diligence and leverage in this respect are key and are a priority. We are also aware of how important other issues are. For example, lobbying. Now, there are obviously issues that we won't be able to mention during this closing statement, but the time has come to bring this enriching day to a close. I would like to thank all participants for their contributions. My thanks also go to governments who made financial contributions and who sent delegations to the forum. And I would like to thank everyone who's been involved in the organization of the panel discussions. Thank you also to everyone who publicly shared their knowledge, their tools, their case studies, their investigations, so that we can all share this common compendium of knowledge and analysis, something which will help us strengthen the consensus. And also thank you to everyone who worked on the logistics, who made it possible for 2,000 people from 110 different countries to come together in several different languages. The forum stands adjourned. Thank you.
Congratulations.